Chapter 7. I woke in the morning to birdsong. The day was not quite light, and Jamie stood over me. "I'm going to work," he said. "You hurry back to the campground and see what you can get from your uncle, like some of them provisions. We could use a blanket." Confused, I said, "Where will you work?" "Back at the docks for a few days, to get some money for our trip. Get up and go now, 'cause the wagons will leave early." Without another word, he hurried away. In the heat of our night together, Jamie had asked me to unbraid my hair, and now it was a mass of tangles. I searched in my valise for a brush, though I was sure I'd left it behind, for my cousins and I had only one hairbrush, the one that had belonged to their mother. Margaret and I had brushed and braided each other's hair, then done the same for the younger girls. We'd pinned up our braids, but left the younger girls' hair in pigtails. There were so many things I was going to miss. I smoothed down the wrinkles in my dress, then quickly combed my hair with my fingers, pulled it back and tied it with my mother's black ribbon. Jamie had left his valise on the ground, so I left mine too. Then I stepped to the road and looked for landmarks so I'd find this place again. Most of the trees along the road seemed to be the same size, except for a giant that might have been the mother of them all. I took a few backward steps on the road toward the campground, trying to fix my landmark in the dim light. Then I turned and ran on toward the campground. I was too late. In the light of morning, I saw the flattened and soiled grass, the ashes of campfires, and the marks of wagon wheels. Far in the distance, I saw a single wagon, a sight that gave me the greatest sense of loss. I was tempted to run after it, though I might not catch it until it stopped. And then what? Jamie would forgive me when I told him about my uncle's gift. Today I'd buy a blanket and enough food to last until he got his wages from the docks. Back at the spot where we'd slept, I lifted my skirt and took a gold coin from the money belt. I walked until I came to the streetcar tracks, then waited. When finally the streetcar arrived, there were no passengers, and the driver got out and lit a cigarette. I entered at the back and showed the conductor my coin. His eyes grew wide. "Miss, the fare's a penny, and I got no change for that." When I started to back down the steps, he said, "Go ahead, take a seat. There's nobody will know the difference." Then he whispered, "Put that piece away and don't let nobody see it." I closed my fist over the coin and held it in my skirt pocket. A family boarded carrying baskets of garden vegetables, and the conductor left me to take their pennies. Outside, the driver stamped out his cigarette and returned to his seat. I left the car when it stopped at a street I recognized. From there, I could get to Mrs. Bond's house, for she was the only person I trusted to see my gold coin. Maybe she'd know what to do. I passed by her front door and went around to the back, figuring she'd be in the kitchen. "My girl," she said. "What's happened? Did your uncle change his mind? I hoped he might, for we've missed you already." "They've gone," I said, then hurried to explain when I saw her quick frown. Jamie decided we should go back to his folks. This seemed the nicest explanation, though not exactly true. Jamie had not mentioned family when he said we'd go to West Virginia. "Oh dear," she said. "The girls will miss you so. But now, have you had breakfast? There's bacon grease on the stove. I can fry you some potatoes real quick, or I can heat the grease and pour it over these greens Hector picked." "Whatever you have," I said. "I've money to pay." My stomach was empty, and my mouth was watering. "Nonsense, you've paid enough. This morning you're my guest." She heated the grease and let it dribble over a bowl of greens, then set it on the table. As I ate the greens, she sliced a potato into the grease left in the pan. "Will you be staying a while then?" "You and him?" "We're moving on. He sent me to buy some things for our trip." I pulled out the gold coin. My, she said, "a gold eagle. I don't have anything smaller than this coin, and the streetcar conductor said I should be careful of showing it." "That you should. The conductor's a good man to say so. There's plenty would have took advantage. I'm surprised Jamie Long didn't think about that." I didn't say he hadn't given me the coin. "What should I do?" "We'll take it to my bank," she said. "You'll be fairly treated there." She gave me a canvas bag to carry and a pouch to put inside for the coins I'd receive in exchange for the gold piece, because so many would weigh down my dress pocket and be obvious. When we left the bank, she took me to a general store where I bought a blanket and bread and enough slices of cooked ham for 3 days. When she asked where we were staying, I said Jamie would decide. When we returned to the boarding house, she asked me to sit and keep her company, but I was afraid Jamie might return to our spot in the woods and be upset if I wasn't there. I promised to visit her as soon as I could, though I knew I would not. Her house was too comforting and too inviting, and if I stayed there too long, I might think less of my husband's choices. In parting, she gave me a hairbrush, noticing that my hair was in need. It was well past noon when I stepped off the streetcar and started down the road from town. Our overnight spot was not far away, but there were others on the road, a wagon ahead, and later, walkers behind me. So when I reached the giant tree, I did not leave the road, but went on for a few minutes, then sat on a mossy rock by the roadside as though to rest. As the walkers approached, they veered to the other side of the road and seemed to clutch their bundles a bit tighter. I nodded as they passed, but they looked straight ahead. They were an old woman and some children, and I was amused that they seemed afraid of me. I wondered about that. I'd worried our spot might be visible from the road, but it was not, and I was relieved to find that everything in the small clearing was just as I'd left it. The first thing I did was to drop a few small coins from the pouch into my dress pocket. Then I wrapped the pouch in my wool dress and placed it at the bottom of my valise. If Jamie found the coins, I'd say the wedding gift was meant to be a surprise. To fill the time and keep myself from worrying about the sounds of strangers going by on the road, I spread the blanket on our grassy bed and opened my Bible to the page where the preacher had written our names and the date of our marriage. Then I lay down, and with my hand on that page, I managed to sleep. Jamie woke me with a kiss and a whisper. "It's a relief to find you've not been disturbed," he said. He was the most welcome sight, especially the concern on his face. Surprised, I said, "You worried about me?" "I was told there's a family of thieves sleeps out at times in these woods." He took my hand and pulled me to my feet. "Let's go. What I earned today will buy us a safer place tonight." "At Mrs. Bond's?" "A house close to my work. I've stayed there before." I unwrapped the package of bread and ham. "Ah, good girl, you did as I said. Did your folks pester you to go along with them?" "No," I said. He tore off a chunk of bread and chewed it with some of the ham while I rolled up the blanket. If he'd chosen to return to Mrs. Bond's, he might have learned where I'd really acquired these things. "Will we take the streetcar to our new place?" "We're well able to walk. We should save our pennies," he said. I admired this sign of thrift, and I decided this was the time to reveal the surprise. "Jamie, we can still go to North Dakota. I have a wedding gift from my uncle, perhaps enough to buy a wagon and a team of our own. Other things, too." Jamie had picked up our valises and taken 2 steps toward the road, but now he turned in surprise. "He gave you that much?" "I think so. It's in my valise. Do you want to count it?" "Not here," he said. "If we don't get going, night will catch us." "Will we go to North Dakota, then?" "I'll have to think about it," he said. The long walk to Jamie's rooming house interested me greatly, for I was a farm girl who'd seen almost nothing of the wider world but railway waiting rooms, the backs of buildings along many railroad tracks, and the streets near Mrs. Bond's house. I gawked at the colors and strange clothing of people on the street, as well as the fronts of every building. We passed tall brick structures near the river, factories and warehouses, Jamie said. Then we walked along streets with small shops and sign-covered windows, advertising fish and meat, tools, remedies, dry goods, furniture, and services like barbering and shoe repair. At times, delicious scents drifted from outdoor food sellers, but more often I breathed through my mouth to avoid the stink of rotting fish, garbage, outhouses, and piles of manure in the streets. I also stopped looking at the ragged, hungry-looking children and the shockingly dressed women whose sad, painted faces peered expectantly from doorways and edges of alleyways. Jamie pulled me onward, at times protectively drawing me close to his side. With him beside me, I did not fear the dark looks of strangers. By the time we reached his rooming house, the moon had been shining for an hour. Without Jamie saying a thing, the landlord took his coin and gave him a lamp along with a warning that refilling the oil would be an extra charge. Jamie passed the lamp to me, and I followed him up a stairway littered with scraps of paper, dust, and grit. The night was young, and I'd hoped we might talk about going to North Dakota, but right away he dropped on the bed and went to sleep. I felt a rush of appreciation for my new husband, who'd worked all day and had walked miles to fetch me from our spot in the grove. Even in shadows, the small room seemed dirty, and I lifted the lamp and inspected its stained walls and dusty corners. A pair of trousers hung from a wall hook, and there was a pile of what looked like rags under the bed, along with a covered chamber pot. An empty basin and pitcher sat on a narrow table of rough lumber. Because the room was stuffy and too warm, I propped open the only window with a short piece of board that seemed meant for that purpose. The bed was narrow with a thin mattress covered by a sheet that did not smell clean. My dress wasn't clean either, but I took it off and turned it inside out, then used it for a pillow. I lay awake beside Jamie for a long time, listening to street sounds, waiting for the small drift of fresher air to cool the room, and thinking about my cousins. In the morning, I woke to a dismal rain that sounded like it had set in to stay. Jamie had lit the lantern and was putting on the trousers I'd seen hanging from the wall hook. "Those are yours?" "This was my room. I went off and forgot them." "I could give your clothes a wash," I said. "The day might clear, and they'd dry over a fence or rail if there's no clothesline. In time, they'd dry in the room." "There's no need for that," he said. "Use the chamber pot now if you like. I'll empty it out back this morning, and tonight I'll bring you something to eat. There's no meals in this house." My hands were grimy, and I had a powerful thirst. "Where do we get water?" "I'll fetch it from the pump out back. It'll be safer if you don't leave the room without me." "I need to stay in here all day?" "It's best," he said. "Time to time there's foreigners stays here. You want to keep away from them." "Is there a sitting room downstairs?" "Not for us," he said. Taking our chamber pot in one hand and the pitcher in the other, he said, "The water's safe. Leastways it ain't killed nobody I heard of." When he returned with the water, I said, "Will you think about buying a wagon and going north?" Jamie tucked his shirt into his trousers. "I'll think about it when I'm ready." I could see I'd offended him. I had a lot to learn about being a wife, but I wanted to be a good one. If I had a broom, I could sweep the room. "Do you have soap?" Soap was something else I'd forgotten. As a wife, I was probably not making a good impression. "No soap at present," he said. "I won't be so tired tonight. I hate to leave you, I do, but it's for the best." He kissed me quickly. Then he was gone. There was no cup for drinking and no soap for washing my hands. To save the water in the pitcher, I held my hands out the window until rain made them clean and cold, then used them to bring water to my parched mouth. I tried not to feel sorry for myself. My cousins would be adjusting to new ways too. When daylight brightened the room, I kicked the rags from under the bed and found a shirt split up the back and a ragged pair of long underwear. I hung both out the window to rinse in the steady rain, then swiped them around the floor to pick up the grit and hung them out the window to rinse again. For the rest of the day, I sat on the floor in front of the window and watched people on the street hurry through the rain. I tried to imagine my family's journey, wondering if rain would turn the ground to mud and if the canvas cover of the wagons would keep my cousins dry.